Oh yeah, what is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and I'm ready to nerd out with my boy, the BoDaddy.
What is up? Hey, dude, I checked the forecast for our episode today, and it is overcast nerdiness with a 40% chance of controversy.
Ooh, wow. In that case, we got to buckle our theological safety belts.
Yeah, it's gonna be something up in here.
You want to know what I got?
Yeah.
I got the first test blend back for the cigar for Theology Beer Camp this year. This is my first time smoking it. I was like, because the there might be 600 people there, but there are like 40 of them that this matters to.
Yeah.
And I knew Lori was going to be here, who's coming to camp, got it approved. You'll be there. So I know whatever I go with, at least you two.
Yeah. People may not know this, but you actually bring a bag of bespoke cigars for the special event.
Yeah, I have like 6 or 7 left of last year's. So you can see it has the Lord of the Rings related
No way.
our logo on it. And last night, Bo, on the big reveal live stream for Theology Beer Camp, we showed the theme. Oh, look at this! They also added a ticker in this pro.
Whoa, a scroll.
Yeah, I think it's pretty funny. But we announced that we're doing Monty Python theme this year, and probably will never say that again because, like, we just want to legally say like it just happens to be similarly themed with meme references and font and art. Just incidentally looks a lot like Monty Python because it's like God Pods and the quest for the Holy Stein.
So are we going to say things like, I fart in your general direction?
Yeah. Yeah. Your mother smells of elderberry.
Oh my gosh. This is going to be fantastic. I've got to work on my British accent then.
Yeah. Last night on the stream, Sarah Heath did hers, and her mom and her family's Canadian, grandparents British, and she just turned on the accent. And I was like, well, I guess they can be on mic when they're in cosplay. I found out that all my British and Scottish accents are not good when I lived in Scotland. They mostly just let me know. They're like, it kind of sounds like an American trying to do our accent. That's what our neighbor. This is an aside, but he's little. He's like 9 or 10, right? While we're living there. Super nice guy. It was great to be in lockdown with this family. They're amazing. Neighbors. So kids lined up so everyone had people to play with. And his Irish family that lives in Scotland, him imitating Americans was the funniest thing.
Yes.
And he would occasionally do it, and I laughed so much that he would he would do it a lot.
Yeah.
Where, he's sitting there, he's like, "Can I get some water?" With this normal accent, and then I'm like, "Where's the water?" And so I would joke back with him and be like, "What is a water?" And he looks at me and he goes, "Hey guys, I think it would be swell if I could get some H2O and stuff like this," where you could just tell like his image of Americans or whoever the stupid influencers on his parents' cell phone are. And he's like, "I totally love staying hydrated."
About 25 years ago, I was part of a leadership school, Arrow, and my roommate was Scottish. He was also living in Canada, but originally from Scotland. And him and I hit it off big time. So the first evening there, I'm still on East Coast time, and I had flown in. And but he had driven down because he was local, and he arrived late, and I was still up, and we were sharing a hotel room. And this guy was unlike anyone I had ever met in my entire life. He had the biggest personality, the fun. He had been an evangelist at like arenas in Europe, and he had the funniest stories. And just so we got talking late into the night, and he looks at me and says, like out of curiosity, and it just dawned on him, and he goes, "Uh, well, do you like ale?" And because 25 years ago, there weren't a lot of us evangelicals that drank ale. And I mean, now it's commonplace, but back then it was sort of still controversial, a little bit scandalous. And my eyes lit up because I thought that I was going to go my entire time there without any ale. And the prospect that him and I, the night before the conference was supposed to start, so he took me to a place, I think it's called Elephant and Castle. And we had so much fun, and he just regaled me with stories. I had never heard anything like some of the stories that he told me. And to this day, I still reference them. But one of my favorite stories that my mother loved and would always ask me to tell is one time him and I were in like a souvenir shop, and somebody asked if he was Irish. And he lost his blessed mind. And he said, do I sound Irish? And he's like, am I wearing panties? Do I eat? I don't remember what he said. Like, he just lost it. And he dug up every Irish stereotype and just berated this poor person behind the counter for mistaking him for an Irish person, because to Scots, that is unacceptable confusion.
Yeah. No, it's hilarious. Like, it's like St. Patrick's Day for Scottish people. They're like, have this vibe of, why do they get a day?
Let's just
like,
admit,
we don't have like St. Scottish Day, and I'm like, yeah, because y'all were Protestant. Like you don't get saints. It's not personal.
No. Can we just admit St. Patrick's Day? And I'm from Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. Like, St. Patrick's Day is a big deal, right? They dye the river green, but every year I am amused at the memes that come out pointing out some of the inconsistencies and ironies related to St. Patrick's Day. For instance, he wasn't Irish, so that's one odd thing. And also, I don't know that he, as a missionary to Ireland, would approve of the debauchery and drunkenness that's used to celebrate his day.
Well, isn't like part of the unique thing about the Irish mission is it's one of the few times the church showed up non-violently, right?
Oh, interesting.
And so maybe what we could learn, and look, your dad was a professional missiologist. He may not have even pioneered this, where you're like, look, there are two different ways successful missions go. One, we kill people and tell them just join up, or we just get loaded with them, because historically one of the signs of creating trust to strangers is you start drinking. Then it's harder to keep lying. It's harder to get in a fight. And so, like, what is the way that you practice canonic missiology within the legacy of colonialist Christendom?
That
is you get to Ireland and they're like, the leprechauns are like, oh, you got to watch out for the Catholics, and they'll take your pot of gold, and then St. Patrick's like, how about we just drink so much I can't carry your gold? And then everyone's like, what is this? Look at this guy. He's got a vow of poverty. He's got a vow of chastity, and he's got a vow to get loaded. What is this religion? And he just gets them all full of the Holy Ghost while drinking. And so I don't know, I feel like there's a high quality missiology text right there, Bo.
you know what, that is not where I thought you were going. I thought you were going to talk about his contextualization for the missionary endeavor. So I did not see that coming. That was interesting.
I read this book called Alcohol. I think it was called Alcohol. It's on like the history of alcohol and the role it plays,
Okay.
right? And like why are there specific alcohols attached to different historic cultures? You know, your microbiome's better at digesting the kind of alcohol that your ethnic heritage like is used to. So that's why you don't like rednecks. Like if I'm with my family and people are drinking bourbon, you're like, okay, they understand what they're doing when they're drinking bourbon. They've been drinking bourbon forever. You hand those same people the same amount of tequila, junk gets weird. And it's not that there's more alcohol. There's anyway. This is the metabolizing of it, right? But there's this whole each culture they have ways in which the social function of alcohol for social bonding and vulnerability, it's played an instrumental role. And so anyway, this book looks at like kind of the history of alcohol and all the places it's played. It shows up in religious rituals across culture, social bonding ones, and
that's really interesting. You know, the two times I think that was most brought home to me is the first time I was in the former Soviet Union in Russia and the role of vodka and even saunas, and just there's a whole culture around that. And oh no, okay, Josh is going to Philippians chapter 2 about kenosis.
Yes, but this is the book, Drunk: How We Sipped, Danced, and Stumbled Our Way into Civilization.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. Okay, I have not read that book. The other time
we should get that dude to come to Theology Beer Camp. Be like, hey Ed Slingerland, do you want to come to Theology Beer Camp?
That would be great. He brought, I mean, yeah, the name itself would be a draw. The other time it was brought home to me was when you and I were in Phoenix for Big Tent Phoenix. And that first night in the hotel, somebody from the southern states had brought some Evan
Williams.
Evan Williams, is that what it's called?
Oh, it's cheap bourbon in a handle.
But there were a whole bunch of people there that hadn't had any in years. And they all migrated up to a hotel room during what was supposed to be down in the hotel lobby, like the get to know you icebreaker cocktail hour. But everybody who had Southern connections ended up in, I think it was Christian Pyatt's room.
Yep.
With and Evan Williams, but there was a whole subculture that was happening up there that like I tried to go up, but I was clearly an outsider.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're like Canadian. Like, don't y'all drink blended whiskey? You know, that's how it works. You know what story I was thinking you were going to tell?
In Labatt's. What's that?
You know what story I thought you were about to tell?
No.
Remember our pizza dinner? It was one of the me and you went to dinner with Zach Lynn from Jimmy Eat World and Rob Bell.
That story,
I was like, Bo's going to tell this story. Y'all should ask him at beer camp. It's funnier off the record. We're not putting this story on the internet.
How I embarrassed myself in front of the most famous person I had ever met.
Yeah, but the funny parts are funny. The awkward parts are just awkward.
The drummer, who was the drummer? What band was he?
Zach Lynn from Jimmy Eat World. Yeah, this is.
Yeah, that did not go well for me.
Well, I don't know. See, here's the thing. Like, the event itself didn't go well, but like, if you're going to have a moment as awkward as that, it should be something that when it comes up, it gets funnier each time with time. And that one does, right? Like, where you just have this story and you're like, literally, if I wasn't there and a part of that, like,
oh man,
like you only have so many things that you remember that long.
Yeah.
And so like I can anyway, we don't need to go off on storytelling.
There are not a lot of stories that I'm embarrassed to tell. Like, I would cringe to tell, but that's one of them.
Well,
hey Tripp, I could use your help with something.
Okay. Oh, I was going to tell you something real quick before
Go,
you.
go ahead. My
No.
problem's not going anywhere.
Oh, I thought this was you were going into the main topic.
I was.
Oh, I was going to tell you last night on the reveal stream.
Yes.
I was
How'd it
going to.
go?
No, it went really good, but
Good.
we've had some new people confirm that they're coming since we talked last week.
Okay.
I was going to let you know. So last week we talked John Dominic Crossan and
Yep.
Phil Clayton doing
Right.
the
Yes.
story and challenge of civilization and groaning of creation in the Bible and then the cosmic version. Um, yep, Adam Clark is coming back to Theology Beer Camp.
Great.
Reggie Williams, who wrote Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus, does it.
Wow.
Kelly Brown Douglas, like OG womanist theologian.
Yeah.
Stacy Floyd Thomas, who's like new
Okay.
generation womanist theologian, does theology and ethics, is the editor of this really cool series at Orbis on kind of intersectional ethics and empire. But anyway, also wonderful preacher and stuff, which also helps at Theology Beer Camp because let's just say some of the sounding board when I send videos of people I want to speak at beer camp that don't have graduate degrees are like, I think that's better for a podcast episode, you know.
Yeah.
Juan Floyd Thomas is coming, who anyway, they've both been on the podcast before. It's going to be awesome. Um, Casper Takuli, who runs the Harry Potter and the Sacred Text podcast,
Oh.
does the Sacred Sacred Design Lab that like helps develop ritual spirituality for people that aren't sure about their location and stuff. Did his MDiv at Harvard. But they do like anyway, it's one of the biggest podcasts, and it's like reading Harry Potter as a sacred text because people don't have religious baggage about Harry Potter like they do the
Yeah.
Bible, but it's
Yeah.
like doing Lectio Divina and all these kind of things with it. And they have a whole network of groups across the world that get together in small groups to do the practice of what happens on the podcast. Anyway, it's really cool.
Wow. And I've never heard of that. I mean, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's usually in the top 10 on religion. So, now I can't remember which ones because anyway, those are more things.
That sounds pretty exciting. And they're all going to end up in Minnesota at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. You know where? Oh, look, I got my ticker. Go to theologybeer.camp on the 15th of May. The ticket price goes up rather dramatically. And so you should go there. Also, on our ticker, the BoDaddy is my friend and gives the best tucks. Look at that. Look at the ticker. See, it's almost as fun as putting in random sound effects.
Yeah, man, this is getting really elaborate.
Yeah, elaborate. Like, Tripp, stop playing with your toys. Okay, now you can set up, because I'll just say your text was very intriguing. I was like, cosmology, Daniel, 3 tiers, and I went,
process thought. All right, I need some help, buddy. So I'm preaching through the book of Daniel, and it's been going pretty well. And as you probably know, the first 6 chapters are all the stories that we teach in Sunday school, like Daniel and the Lion's Den is chapter 6. And those are really easy. You know, don't bow to the golden idol.
well, you thought it was easy.
Yeah, I did. But then it transitions in chapter 7, and it gets into the prophecy part that a lot of mainliners and progressive Christians don't interact with very much. I haven't preached it in more than 20 years, and so I didn't know exactly what I would do with them, but it's been going incredibly well. Even last week, Daniel 9, the prophecy of the 70 weeks, talking about reading it through a messianic lens of a prophetic interpretation versus an apocalyptic, and it's been really good. But I'm now up to Daniel chapter 10 for this coming Sunday, and I'm in a little bit of a pickle, and I need your help getting out of it. Okay. So in Daniel chapter 10 is a very strange story, but I think that the modern application of it is going to be even weirder than most people. Like if I locked you in a room and gave you 100 guesses about what some people do with this text, you wouldn't get it. Okay? So the text itself, Daniel chapter 10, Daniel has a vision. And in that vision, he has a visitor that comes to him. And some people think it's the angel Gabriel, who is in charge of communication. And he references Michael, who's in charge of, he's like the archangel in charge of the military angelic forces. But there's a visitor that some people think is a theophany, that it's a pre-incarnate visitation by the Son of Man. Okay. So in this very, very strange vision, a couple things happen. And I'm going to start reading in verse 12, okay? So then whoever this visitor is that glows and, right, says, "Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since your first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of Persia, the prince of the Persian kingdom, resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to my help because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you all that will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come." And then he goes on to talk to him about what's going to happen, and then ends by saying in verse 20, "So he said, 'Do you know why I have come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. And this is in the first year of Darius the Mede. I took my stand and support to protect him.'" Okay? So this is one of the strangest texts, I would argue, in all of the Bible. And in a bit, I want to tell you how it gets even stranger with what people do with it. But here's what I need to pick your brain about. Tripp, how do we, as progressive, let's say minded Christians who believe in scientific engagement, right? And how do we talk about the fact that our Bible comes to us embedded with a 3-tiered universe, with heaven above and hell below, or however you want to phrase that, but that there are heavenly realms and that the cosmology has a metaphysic in it that has spiritual powers and territorial spirits, strong men, angelic forces? Like, does process thought have a way of addressing the 3-tiered universe? Or do we just do like the liberal thing of dismissing it as an antiquated and vestigial remnant of the past? What do we do with the fact that Scripture is embedded with this? Paul had the same thing. When Paul talks about engaging the powers that be, like, he has this angelic realm, right? The book of Revelation has it. What do we do? And even if you go with a theopoetic interpretation of it, right? And sort of, even if you read it through the lens of, literature of the oppressed, I mean, excuse me, even in the book of Revelation, each church has its own angel. Like, is that a linguistic, like it's a form of speech? Is it a convention of writing, like literature of the oppressed? Is it a theopoetic, and we're not bound to believe in unseen realms and heavenly high places? Like, you got to help me out, dude. What do we do with the fact that these texts exist in our canon?
Okay. All right. I wrote down 4 things while you were
Great.
talking, and you can tell me if any of these are helpful.
4 is a very biblical number.
There's a verse for everything, And so, but if But if I add more, I have to go all the way up to 7. But I could cut one and get to 3.
Yep.
Um, okay, so there, one of the points just to think about, uh, like, what is the activity that the author and community that this text arises from? What are the features of the way they make meaning and narrate, that we share, right? So one thing that goes to my head immediately, but processing this, is that all language is always embedded in some social, cultural situation, and that language gets selected because it actually helps one thrive in relating to the world. So whatever reality is in and of itself, culture, language, and these things emerge within human beings, and the language and stuff ends up surviving because it it's selected for, right, like, in helping us thrive. So
Hmm.
if you look at, um, the best things we know about the birth of religion prior to anything like the high god, big god religions of Judaism, even, right? They are they emerge right about the time we start to relate to more than 150 people or so, and it's to build social bonds, cooperation, shared identities of trust when you can't actually know everyone that you have to cooperate with, which is was quite a feat. About the time we start to have agriculture and don't move, and all these kind of features there, right? So one of the things to recognize is, um, that the descriptive power of language in any age, like its world picture, um, is accomplishing something and has survived and thrived because it did something in the world, for that community. It doesn't mean that it corresponds to reality, but it does track with it in a way that the communities that took it seriously, um, that we even know about them, right? So there's that one element. When it goes to what we know about the individual, as Homo sapiens, um, it is natural. Religion is one of the most natural things we know about the cognitive mechanisms that any individual that matures naturally has. Theory of theory of mind, attribution of agency, these and belief in humans. Like, one of the things that makes humans distinct, where culture first emerges, is because we have evidence, us and a few of our progenitors, um, it differentiated the selfhood of a person from their physical body. So we both understand our finitude, and what are the earliest religious rites and stuff that emerge? Uh, uh, Burial of the dead. It cost energy, time, and resources to bury the dead. So this is kind of like, we understand that human beings thought there was something more to the subject, right, than just material. And this is early, even before anything Homo sapiens sapien. Um, so I say that because I think one of the temptations we have is to look at this language and then just dismiss it because we're like, well, we know more now, and this is stupid. So it was doing something. We have the same cognitive mechanisms. You could both be ardent atheists, and your kids will still believe in invisible forces that have agency, and you can interpret reality and events in the world as if they were goal oriented. All these kind of things happen, right? And uh, how religious your nation is doesn't change whether these cognitive mechanisms come online.
Mm.
Um, so if we get to the place where you want to, like, demythologize, that text, also recognize, this is point two, that we have to demythologize our own, right? So any particular world picture, that you function from culturally and socially, uh, is is subject to the same kind of demythologizing energy. We used to tell the story, in a way in which, oh, we're moving from ignorance to more knowledge and things. But in the last 30 years, there's been rather dramatic shifts, both, a lot more of the philosophy side, but even take anthropology. There's what's been called the ontological turn in anthropology, where anthropologists took this, oh, the crescendo of human knowledge, Western science explanation, and then go, well, actually, when we take this frame, we interpret other cultures, say indigenous cultures, or what we know from early missionaries in the 18th and
Yeah.
19th century. We interpret these cultures on our own world picture. What
Right.
happens if you do it, we wouldn't actually survive if we interpreted the world in these contexts there. So like Eduardo Kuhn in his book, How Forests Think, gives these beautiful descriptions, you know, if it's time in living in indigenous people. And so like when we go, no, like we don't have a grasp on reality that well. There are tons of that we come to understand. We can engage powerfully in an attempt to control because of the modern Enlightenment scientific mind.
Yeah.
But it also mutes and reorients our cognitive mechanisms of how we relate to the world. Like becoming literate would be a really bad thing to do in most of human history because it reworks parts of our mind that are to sense our environment in nature where we have a lot more threats. We're on animals menus. Anyway, we have to pay attention to seasons and all these other kinds of things if you're a hunter gatherer. So like the more we know about both what are shared culturally and cognitively as a species, and the more we become humble about the finality of our current given, then I think that demythologizing act goes both ways. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
yes, theirs isn't final, but neither is ours. And I feel like there's a way for me that actually gives me the ability to go, okay, so I don't have to give final ontological status to the description that the text raises. But
Okay.
is there something about the way they engage the world as the people of God in relationship to these forces and challenges that I can take seriously? And does it problematize the way I would interpret and narrate history? Right. And I
Okay.
think in that case, something like an angelic realm or all that kind of stuff takes on a different tenor. Um, and so then like the three-tier universe, the appropriate question isn't, well, how dumb is that? But um, like what what are these narrative stories and descriptions getting at, given it was spoken in a three-tier context? So like it, and we have to do this too, right? To earlier, even modern thinkers, think of prior to the current dominant cosmology, variations of what normally gets called Big Bang cosmology. Um, there was a time that the sophisticated account of the universe, it had no beginning. Now, some of us process people might think that's reasonable for other reasons, but like most people go, oh, there's a T1, right? The first moment. Well, that happens. And then there's a whole bunch of theology that was done before that that was modern. And it's like, no, well, now we know how the world works. And oops, now we learned this other thing and we have to change it, right?
Okay.
But when we go back, we go, yeah, but we learned this. And now we can reread Schleiermacher with an updated this or that. And this, I think, partially because we're closer and it's part of our lineage.
Okay.
So to read generously people of the past that didn't have the knowledge we had, because they could have knowledge that we don't know how to ask the right question to get at. And so if we've learned to do that with people in our own tradition, and that we share a lot in common with, what's it like to do it with our ancient ancestors? And so I like to think of when you get to texts like this as a minister or even in the classroom, it's how do we take our ancestors of faith seriously and don't patronize them, and and let's treat them how we hope in 500 years, if human beings are still around doing things, they treat us. Do you want to go up and can you believe, did you look at these people, they got such a reductive account of consciousness and now we know X, Y, and Z is just stupid, I don't even care, look at this is just wrong? Or are you going to ask, like, is there a difference between the descriptive account of one's faith and its relationship to a world picture and the energetic form or enactment of one's faith within it? And so the part of these texts for me um, are like helping us learn to think with uh, someone that is a part of our history and a part of our faith that have very different assumptions and givens, and yet they're part of us, which is going to be a hard task because apparently at this point we can't even do it with half the people on our streets. So,
Yeah.
but it is a thing to learn. So, yeah.
No, that's really interesting starting point, because I mean, I struggle with that sometimes. Like if I'm reading the patristics, the early church fathers trying to figure out Christology, the early formulations of Trinitarian theology. I struggle with that when it comes to Luther, or even Reformed theology, modern Reformed theology. I think, yeah, if you have a 17th century metaphysic, I'm sure election is still a live debate. Like, so I do this even with Bart's debate with Emil Brunner. I struggled with that in seminary. Like, this, I don't know, this doesn't seem pertinent or like binding now. It seems like we've transcended that. So I recognize in myself what you're talking about. For me, it's not with the text itself of scripture, but in subsequent theological controversies, I find myself like sort of shaking my head like, I can't believe this was such a big deal. Like, and people died over it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm interested in, when you're looking at the text, um, like what, like, where do you go first, or what's the observation that pops in your head first? Because I mean, there seems to be a number of different features of it that I'm attracted to. But I'm interested in, like, when you read it,
Yeah.
where do you go? Okay, I think this is the place I'm going to begin. I want to see how similar it is to my immediate intuition. You've thought about it more than me.
So I've modified Recur, and I bring 4 questions to the text. What would the original audience have understood that I don't? The second one is, what do we do with it? Or what has it come to mean in history? Like, has it evolved or taken on any new meaning or baggage? The third question is the application question. What do we do with it in our modern context? And then the fourth question that I get from Recur is, what's the future of this text, or what's the most it can mean? So that's, for me, that's the lens through which the 4 questions that I bring to every text.
Oh, that's helpful. The Yeah, and one of the things Recor helps with too is the what do you call it? It he he is aggressively dismissing kind of the hyper modern framing for how you do with text,
Right.
how you deal with text. And so when you look at it, right, to me, one of the things that comes to mind almost immediately is when you read this with the whole of Scripture, right? Especially if you're thinking even the Son of Man element, there is the "Do not be afraid" line is a rather consistent one.
That's true,
right? And what is Daniel afraid of? Right? It is the way he sees powers beyond his limits to do anything about, shaping and determining history, and reorienting and perverting the context of flourishing for him and the people of God. Right. And so there's this element going on, right, where it's like, how do I narrate and make sense of things I have intuitions about and see working that are beyond my ability to do anything about, these nations and doing this? And yet the first word of faith is "do not fear." And then you get this cosmic narrative where essentially it's going, and this is not a foreign one if you're Jewish, right? Like, one of the things that the Hebrew Bible's insistent on is, despite the evidence of history and the outcomes that historically keep happening to you,
right?
The most true thing about history is that it comes from one good God, and this is a God of justice, and in the end, justice will prevail. And then the counter witness in history is significant. And so this one is to go, like in this apocalyptic context that Daniel's in, what does that actually mean? It means that there's like real business going down. And you're hearing a narrative where some angels are doing some junk going down and like having a nice little whatever. And but if you're do not be afraid, I'm showing up to tell you we are going to get our business done. We're invested in this. It is difficult and crazy. Like it's so crazy. I'm going to tell you some stories about hollering out for angelic reinforcements and some, like you have this whole
Wow.
thing going on. But despite your ability to look at history and narrate how God's providing the solution, I want you to know God's all in, and you can still be too. And you can go join God in going on, and you don't need to have fear, because even if these like evil angels are battling with so and so or whatever, like reinforcements show up. Like you do not live in a world that is inherently dualistic with a good power and a bad power going off back and forth. No, you live in one where there's one good God. And these forces that resist God have their origin in God and have an end in God. And so do not fear. They don't have the ability to be the author of the story. And it doesn't matter who claims God's identity. It doesn't matter who claims to be the son of God. The different emperors doing this. Like they're just wrong. And so take a big deep breath and know, yeah, some angelic angel shit is doing horrible things, and they don't get to have the last word. It's just
Wow.
not. And so you could just think of what that would sound like in our own context, right? There are tons of people looking at just even like not Tripp and his more leftist versions of things, but just like where you're looking there going, how the hell are we like running? Like, when did we become allies of Russia and are undoing the post World War II era, which is the longest Europe since they had nation states, didn't like turn into crazy wars and kill each other? We're gonna f around and find out about that. What what are we doing? We switched to think of all that going on, and you could name it. And then Daniel like is sitting there overwhelmed by anxious, fearful for real reality, and he doesn't get told the reality's not real or the
Yeah.
challenges are. No, he's like, dude, there's some like crazy angelic battles and stuff going on. There's real stuff going down. But it begins with don't fear. Don't fear. And I'm going to tell you the truth about what's going on, like, and it's going to include all the horrible stuff that you're facing. And yet, that is part of a bigger story that allows you not to be determined by your anxiety and your fear,
Yeah.
not to close yourself off, not to turn interior, not to give up hope, because fear only makes sense if you don't see the big picture. And so I'm going to let you in on how junk's going down. And Michael's like, here's, you got to check this stuff. You thought, oh, I got tied up. Right? And there's a nice little battle going on. And then there's this other bad demon. He comes out and he hands this one prince a chair and he whacks me. People are like, whoa, you aren't going to disqualify them, Judge? What's going on? And then the angelic choir starts going. And like Ultimate Warrior, I just started shaking up and I clock him. And then boom, Hulk Hogan comes out and joins the fight. And it's going down. And I came over here to let you know we're going to dominate these fools. Like, I'm a Hulkamaniac. I got like it's like this. You're hearing this story and going, you thought if you're just looking at this one round and this one thing, oh, he put a chair, they're getting screwed, blah 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 blah. You're like, no, they're the heel. The heel eventually loses. I know what happens at WrestleMania. Anyway, like,
No, that's.
I feel like there's a scent, right? Like, so then it goes, like, what is the wisdom our ancestors are giving? Is permission to be honest about the tragedy and injustice of reality, and honest about what the nature of hope is in the world. And so fear can be conquered by faith without the transformation of what's going on.
So there's a historical, that's really good stuff. There's a historical component that I think makes it even more interesting, which is that the story of Daniel is set in a Babylonian captivity at about 600 BCE, let's call it. But scholars think it was written in the 200s BCE when they have returned from Babylonian captivity and are now under, by the Greeks, specifically Alexander the Great, they are under in their own territory, military occupation. So the difference between captivity and occupation, right? And the year 168 becomes really important as you get into Daniel chapter 11, because you move from, in this prophecy in Daniel chapter 10 that we just read, you move from the Persians tried to move all the way out into Greece and were unsuccessful, I think under Xerxes, if I'm right on this. But it wasn't until the Greeks actually came and conquered the Persians that things got interesting. And then you add in this group called the Seleucids, who were a seafaring branch, let's call them, of a Greek civilization that conquered, and they moved down into Egypt. And so these four kingdoms, the Persians, the Greeks, the Seleucids, and the Egyptians, the prophecies in Daniel chapter 11 is how scholars date when Daniel was written, because he, like in Daniel chapter 10, he gets this right. He calls it, like, Persia tries to move against Greece. It's unsuccessful. Greece comes back and conquers, right? And so up to this point in Daniel, he's been 100% on all of his predictions, because it's set in 600, but it was written in 200, let's say. But he gets something wrong finally in Daniel chapter 11, and they date that to 168 BCE. So this is Daniel's way of talking about how kingdoms and powers move against each other. And there's sort of a convention of literature that he's utilizing with this principalities and powers, princes in the air. And so I just think historically there's an interesting element that from our perch so many years later, that scholars look and say, what was Daniel doing and how was he doing it? So I think there's just a historical element that's really interesting.
This is, I think we talked about it a few weeks ago, where when people are debating like the uh, historical composition of Daniel, like one of the ways they notice it is like, oh, well, he's really nailed history right up until you get to this point, and then there's this. So it's like,
yeah,
wonder how you had New York Times accuracy followed by,
yeah.
All
right, but here's where it gets even weirder, Tripp. You ready for a twist? So modern evangelicals and charismatics do something very interesting with this text that you may not think to do it. So I want to just ask you an introductory question, and for our listeners to think about. Do people groups, nations, territories, do they have spirits? So there's a way of talking about communities, ethnicities, cultural groups that we actually do utilize today. We don't use the supernatural language of spirits and princes and even principalities and powers, but we do talk about an ethos or a value or a spirit about a certain people. We do it especially cross-culturally. When we travel, whether that's for leisure or short-term missions, and people talk about their experience, whether it's in the Caribbean islands or South and Central America, Africa, Asia, they will often talk sort of generically in broad strokes about almost a different spirit that people have. Okay. And that's a very innocuous way to talk about that. Here's where it gets weaponized. And I'll tell you two stories. One is just recently in our Sunday school here in Southern Idaho, we had a visitor. And she was from a church that believes in this thing called the 7 mountains theory of culture. That that is actively being put into place right now through the 2025 project and what's happening with our current presidential administration and Doge. The 7 mountains theory of culture is being employed right now.
Yeah,
Okay?
well, there's 7 of them, so it's probably true. That's a biblical number. No. If it was the sixth mountain,
Right.
sketchy.
So she said in our conversational Sunday school, because anybody can share anything they want. She said you have to be careful how many immigrants you let in to your country or your area, because they bring a spirit with them. Now, you might throw that away as initially as just outrageous and xenophobic, but it actually, the proof text for it is Daniel chapter 10, that people groups and countries and nations and territories come with territorial spirits. And so one of the reasons she said that we were having so many problems in our country is because we had let in so many immigrants from specific places of the world. And when you have, a certain amount of them, and they bring this spirit with them, that's what's causing all of the problems and the cultural chaos that we have in our country right now. So you might, Tripp, if I gave you 1,000 guesses and you're reading Daniel chapter 10, you may never come up with a racist or xenophobic interpretation of it about immigration. Right?
I don't think I would.
But now I'm going to take it up a notch. When I was...
Can I ask a question about that to make sure I'm understanding?
Please, yes.
And, okay. So is this something like, so in the text, one of the things, if I was going to do 5 points, but obviously not a biblical number, it seems that one of the things in apocalyptic literature that's in both the canon and out, it appropriates that the Hebrew, like the Torah texts that are henotheistic, right, where there are different tribal deities, Yahweh being the one for Israel, so like Baal and the Philistines, and you get this language of the deities battling it out and stuff, and
yes,
you have your God, but then there are these other gods for these other peoples. And then eventually you see a transition where the other tribal deities are angelic forces, not God, because there's only one high God, Most High God. Then you get, like in Psalm 82, Yahweh just kills all the other ones because they aren't doing justice. And then now you just have one because God killed the other gods because they weren't very just. Or you get these, like the divine warrior motif in the Psalms is like Yahweh-izing like Psalms that were to another deity, but like then the character of the gods change, but the language is appropriated. That's grounded in a lot of weather imagery and these kind of things. Oftentimes, and I think this is John Collins, who's one of the leading scholars of apocalyptic literature. But I'm thinking back like 15 years at this point. So when I took an apocalyptic literature class, one of the things that language used is that they often in the ancient Near East, those gods actually were described in ways that match how the other tribes and nations saw the character of that people, right? So, so like, oh well, the spirit of these people that you're describing, that angel, it's acting like the one narrating it goes like, this is our characterization of the Amorites. So their god acts like this or whatever.
And Philistines. The Philistines were a warlike people.
Yeah, and so's their god, and they got that. They
the
got
Assyrians with Moloch. Yeah.
So, I mean, we could look at that, right, and go, that's dumb. But if we use if we use like that kind of what I was talking about, you'd go, well, no, we still do the same thing, right? Like, think of the language used in the Cold War. that legitimated all sorts of foreign policy. Oh,
Yes.
the bear, these kind of things. Think
Yes.
of why we love talking about World War II. It's because the way we narrate ourselves as Americans, we're like the hero and the
Yes.
goody, and in that, the confidence about our excellence kind of set up some
Yes.
stuff. So like we still do the same thing, and uh, and and the reason we do it is we're trying to articulate how we both understand what's going on in history, our place in it, and in the way we narrate ourselves as a people. Like, who are we so that we can try to hold ourselves accountable to this vision of our collective identity, right? And America had this vision, and they try to act it out. And sometimes when you have a bad narrative, it sets you up to do horribly imperialist things that support the implementation,
Mm.
the kind of like post Cold War implementation of the global market system that pillage the planet and the poor, and under an extractive logic. But you are just telling the story about America and democracy and freedom, and you like completely miss it, right? Because your narrative of your idolatrous narrative of your God uh, sweeps this stuff in, right? So like I feel like there are really cool. The moment you go, this isn't talking ontologically about an actual angel, but it is talking about how we articulate our narrative, our understanding of the neighbor, and all those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And look at the way, like in America, uh, one of the perks of it, right, is 100 years ago we were very similar to the present, where there was this like kind of like spirit of
Mm.
disengagement globally, resisting immigration, these kind of things. And after that is when you get the kind of vision that is now people are rolling their eyes at, growingly, where, oh no, part of like one of the cool things about America is we are a multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy, and the image of like the melting pot, right, where America gets cooler, and we like ourselves better. We have better food, we got better music and arts, we got all these things. And why? Because we like, if you want to be a part of us, we want you to be part of who we are, right? And there's that image. Um, the other kind of image that emerges in the 90s around these issues is where people are like, oh, we should be more of a tossed salad, like where these
Mm-hmm.
different cultures and expressions stay autonomous, but they're all in this same bowl, right? And
Yeah.
there's that particularity side of it. And when I think of someone reading that text, noticing what's there, and then going, oh, you got to watch out because the spirits of these other people are going to come in. Um, Part of what I think they're pointing at is, and there's real good social science on this, if you want to have a collective identity and narrative for a people, one, it actually is intensified by the acquisition of other people into your space in a non-combative way. But
Mm.
there's a shift depending on kind of how your personality type works, where the presence of people that you don't experience as having a shared culture, when it crosses about 15% of the people you interact
Yes.
with regularly,
Yes.
you now feel like your own identity is under threat. So
Mm.
there's this weird sense, if you look at America, like these places where we open up immigration and then close it, so much of it could be explained by going, at this point, we were more people are coming here for the opportunities, this vision of America, and they were integrated into the life of America over time, right? So, there are all sorts of communities that used to be Irish or Italian, and now they're
Mm.
just white Americans.
Yeah.
One of the things in the past election is how many second and third generation Hispanic people will now, um, if you didn't check an ethnic box, but only looked at their social values, answer like a working class white person,
Yeah.
right? So, uh, you know, like knowing that, if and hearing someone appropriating that text that way, I think raises the question of, is our awareness of the other, the volume of the other, right? The number of people that immigrated, the way in which that's being narrated through kind of like social media and tribal, all these kind of things, is generating, whether it is accurate or not about a different community in America, right? It's generating this sense of the other in our midst, as opposed to the other, kind of expanding our identity. It's like there's a reason families don't adopt 50 people at one time.
Yeah.
Even though I know plenty of people that adopt kids and they adopt one and then they'll adopt
Yeah.
others. And there's this whole process of, we become a new person when you join our family,
Yeah.
and you become a new person because you're part of our family. We have to like negotiate it. But if you just like brought in 50 new kids, the
Yeah.
two that were there before and the parents are outnumbered, and there's this whole thing going on, and you're like, what's so it's just kind of like, it's a feature of human beings. And seeing someone read the text, right, where it generates this kind of xenophobic, and then like, what do I do with my fear of being overwhelmed by otherness, where the culture around me I feel
Yeah.
alienated
Yeah.
from? I'm going to attribute it to
Yeah.
this evil spirit coming, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Just look at how people talked about Haiti, right?
Yes.
Oh, anyway, I don't want to have a
Yep.
sidetrack on that, but that is a great example. If people just Google like how Clinton and the World Trade Organization thought about the problem in Haiti, and no one in it said, I think it might be because we completely screwed up their economic system. No, it's
Right.
because they got this spirit of voodoo running up in that piece.
Yep.
We got
Yep.
to turn them into like the World Bank funded reformed missionaries in Haiti because they thought, well, they'll be able to evolve and join the modern
Yep.
world if we just have more Protestant work ethic in that place.
Instead of looking at when French colonialism collapsed and the
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Anyway, but no. So I was just making sure, like, I say all that because that's what was going through my head when you look at the kind
Yeah.
of series of
Oh.
what happens when you call it a spirit. There
Yeah.
is something going on there
Yeah.
that's important. It correlates to these other questions, and
Yeah.
you can see the way it's expressing, even if we find it
Yeah.
ethically problematic, it's expressing a real feature of social psych that we know about people
Yeah.
groups and their identity.
I mean, the easiest way to talk about it is Elizabeth Johnson said, our theological language functions.
Mm-hmm.
Something's getting itself done in our theological language.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's where the rubber meets the road. So at the peak of my charismatic-ism, I really bought into this idea that I got from a guy named George Otis Jr. and other writers and thinkers on the subject. His famous book is called The Last of the Giants, and it's about this sort of thing, this territorial spirit, but specifically about Islam in the 21st century and our war on terror. And him and people like Robert Weber and others were really concerned about the Islamic influence in global affairs, and specifically in Christian America. And one of the things that they did with this Daniel 10, people like George Otis Jr., is when they talked about territorial spirits, one of the things they did was called spiritual mapping. And so, like, I was in a town called Saratoga Springs, New York at the time. And one of the things they wanted us to do is to map our town. So the opening question was, how do people get to Saratoga? What are the gates? We called these spiritual gates. And for us, there was a sort of an Ivy League university named Skidmore. There was the racetrack. There was the shopping center at exit 15. And there were the spas, and the Performing Arts Center down at the park. And those were the four corners of our town. And so those became our spiritual gates. How do people get in here? And we thought that that was where the spiritual influence was. Okay. So what we were taught to do was called prayer walking, where you would go to these centers of power and you would walk around and pray over them, right? Because you wanted Jesus, the Spirit of Christ, to be the influential thing. And so you combated the spirits that were the powers, in that place. And so we would pray over the university, Skidmore College. We would pray over the track and all of the tourists that would come in that way. We would walk around the park and pray for that, and the spas and the Performing Arts Center there, and around the exit 15, the shopping center.
What was What's the deal about spas?
Oh, in Saratoga Springs, it used to be called 10 Springs, and back before white people showed up, even the Native Americans there were 10 natural springs in Saratoga Springs. It was used to be called 10 Springs, and they converted it into like the Lincoln Baths. You could go and soak in either hot or cold, mineral or spring, depending on what your ailment was. And ironically, I was part of a denomination at the time, Christian Missionary Alliance. The founder, A.B. Simpson, used to come and soak in the springs.
So basically the community you were part of then saw like the soaking in the springs thing as some like pagan spiritual type thing.
No, no, it wasn't that. It was, or you could, by the way, you could also drink the water. A lot of us drank the water from the springs because it had natural minerals and
Yeah.
things in it. It was basically that trusting in anything other than God's divine healing. Why we didn't think the springs were a gift from God, I don't know, but
Yeah,
um,
that's kind of what I was trying to figure out. The like I'm like, well, wouldn't a spring be like way more a gift from God than
yeah,
Tylenol?
we didn't have a great natural theology trip.
Yeah, well, that was before you realized that Bruner won the
Yeah,
debate with Bart.
part of buying into a supernatural worldview is, I mean, it really is a lens through which you interpret natural phenomenon. It's just sort of built into the DNA. It's baked into the bread, as they say. So Renee says this is still a thing, by the way. Renee Goodwin, she says that they do it at the courthouse in her town square. I'm telling you, this is a thing. Well, here's where it goes up a notch. We were part of a Christian Missionary Alliance, right? A missionary denomination. We would do short-term mission trips all over the world, to Bosnia, Cambodia, Thailand, Africa, even South and Central America. And we would do these prayer walks. Missionaries would teach us to do these. And you did is you would come in and, you know, whether you had VBS for little kids or whatever, how you would prepare is you would walk around the town, and instead of praying with your eyes closed, you would pray with your eyes open, and you would try and take authority over things that you thought were bad, right? But in hindsight, one of the things that really bothers me about this approach is that really what you're doing is cross culturally, you're noticing the things that make you uncomfortable. And if you haven't done your own internal work and your cultural sensitivity training, this it can be a cover for very racist and xenophobic perspectives, but that you chalk up to spiritual discernment, right? And there's just something about it that makes me very uncomfortable. And I was thinking about this when I was in Philadelphia visiting my sister one time. And I noticed that in Philly, there's a lot of people who sit out front on their stoops. If those people were to come to my suburban neighborhood and do a prayer walk, they would probably pray against a cold spirit of suburbanism where no one sat out on their stoops. And then I would have to explain to them in this imaginary conversation, I would have to explain to them, oh, we don't have stoops, we have porches, and they're not out front, they're out back. And if they saw the fences separating everyone's property and the garage doors were down, they would probably pray against a cold spirit. And they wouldn't be wrong. It's just chalking it up to a supernatural power instead of a cultural collective value. When we go to other countries or other neighborhoods and do this, it's not that we're wrong in our observation. It's that when we ascribe it to spiritual realms, it can be weaponized in a way that our racism and cultural insensitivity is masked and justified by these spiritual mechanisms.
Well, what do you think is the difference between something like that and like Moral Mondays in North Carolina, right? Reverend
Mm.
Barber organizes them. Obviously, they are more welcoming of people that
Mm.
aren't inherently religious. But if you go
Okay.
to a Moral Monday gathering, they're straight up praying about, uh, like in front of lawmakers, about
Yeah.
the racist redefinition of our rewrote our congressional districts to get as many black people in two or three of them as possible, where like in a state where a majority of people will vote for a democratic representative, we still only have a third of the actual
Yeah.
representatives in the house, or any other law like that, right? Like it's a gathering, it's a moral one, so it's the shared values get people together, but the liturgy of Moral Mondays is the black church, right? And I remember
Yeah.
one time at it, um uh and a lot of different people speak, and so you'll get from like the secular humanist, blah blah blah, into the
Yep.
all sorts of different faith traditions that be there. Well, there's an elderly African American woman who's one of the local coordinators, and she was talking and said, I know some of you don't believe in God or the power of prayer, but today you're praying with your feet, and our feet, whether you like know God or not, is
Yeah.
saying, God of justice,
Yeah.
we need your spirit to show up and unclog the ears of these lawmakers, and going this. And
Mm.
I'm sitting there and I hear one of the people next to me go, and she's like, well, she used language, spiritual language,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the demonic energy of racism and blah, 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 that's been a part of American
Whoa.
history. And the guy,
Whoa.
the guy next to me talks to his other friends like, I don't believe in God. But I know what she's talking about when she talks about
Whoa.
our demons as a people, America's demons, right? And um and so it's just fascinating, right? Like that someone's completely secular, but in that context where they have these shared values, which
Yeah.
as a theologian you would go like is responding to the nature and character and values of God in the material world. Um, the, there wasn't like a wow, I think she shouldn't be talking because she narrated it differently. Um, and so just I say that because sometimes, right, like the problem that you first raise is someone who read this text and goes, I'm going to appropriate this language for some racist shit. Like, oh,
Yeah.
we got too many immigrants bringing over those foreign deities. And you kind of want to ask, you're like, yeah, I wonder what the Native Americans thought what we brought over when we showed up getting off the plane. They're like, well,
Yeah.
I don't know. By the time someone actually read the Gospel of Matthew, they finally like it gets translated, or someone learns English. They're like, they, this is the guy they came over talking about. Have y'all read this, John?
Yeah.
So it's like it's not a. So one of the problems might just be the actual character of the God that this language is being leveraged towards, not
Yeah.
that human beings understand that there are values that transcend what an individual does, and that the life we have together with our neighbors can be dramatically shaped by the values that are enacted as a collective,
Hmm.
and how we want to narrate them as one thing or the other. There is like the fun, you know, social science feature that if they're actually narrated in relation to the transcendent, you actually have more individual sacrifice of time and energy and resources into the combating of these forces.
Yeah.
But uh, anyway, I was just when you were describing it, I thought if we just switched the
Yeah.
valuation taking
Yeah.
place, even a secular humanist at Moral Mondays, like, I don't believe
Yeah.
in demons, but she has a point.
That's a great story. Let me just piggyback on a couple things there. Randy Woodley, when he talks about drums, singing, and dancing in native ceremonies, he talks about how they were outlawed because they thought it was demonic. But then he goes on to detail the Christianity of the white settlers and how their use of violence and control was far more demonic than right. So if anybody is interested, that Randy Woodley does a great job with that. The other person that I love on this is Eddie Izzard, the cross-dressing comedian. He has a section when he talks about the Church of England, and he contrasts it with black spirituals. in the time of slavery, and he contrasts the singing between those who had power and those who didn't have power, and how ironic it is that these live, powerful, expressive, right, songs came out of oppression and slavery and domination. But then when you listen to the hymns of the institutional church at the same time, and he just has a funny way of making fun of English Anglican singing. And you would never know that they had all the gold and all the power and all of the right. So just two things that I thought of when you were talking about that. But to go back to your question about Moral Mondays, I think the issue really comes down to power. It is the most important ingredient, because when we would go over to Bosnia or to Thailand and Cambodia, where our sister churches were, in hindsight, we had all of the financial resources, the authority to determine the curriculum for the week. We were bringing, the energy to do the kids' VBS or whatever it was that we were going to do, the men's retreat, the Wild at Heart stuff, whatever it was. And so for us to come into their area and to walk around and pray against things that we thought were bad from our Western perspective and our privilege, and for us to try and take authority over their territorial, geography. I mean, there's a real imbalance of power that needs to be accounted for and attended to. Otherwise, it can be really, I'm going to say, dangerous in one sense. And Tripp, the truth is, off the record, I have heard so many missionaries tell me behind the scenes, off the record, that they recognize the problematic nature of short-term missions and prayer walking, but that financially it is so good if you have groups of young people or multi-generational groups come over, then they feel connected to your ministry in that country, and then they raise money, they give you a gift, right? They bring the resources, or they bring all the stuff for the VBS, or pay for the men's retreat to go rafting and fishing and for the retreat center, that it's so financially beneficial to bring over these short-term groups. But the reality is, the powerful work of foreign missions is built through long-term relationships and investments in the community. The trade-off with these short-term missions is that they're basically, in these missionaries' words, glorified vacations. They're glorified tourism under the banner of something spiritual, but that the financial benefit means that you can't not do it, because otherwise, you're over in a Bosnia or a Cambodia and people sort of forget about you. By bringing over these groups, they become invested in your work in the country. But it's actually your long-term relational networking that makes the biggest difference for foreign missions, right? These short-term things, and specifically the prayer walking, I don't know, man. And so when you couch that within an understanding of whether it's the Last of the Giants and spiritual mapping, prayer walking, or even this Daniel 10 and the territorial principalities and spirits, there's something about it that is just really cringy.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, what comes to mind here, and I'll say a little something, mostly because I'm pretty sure you will remember way more about this. But you remember how, like, the emerging church movement,
Yeah.
how inspiring Leslie Newbigin was, the guy that
Sure.
kind of like pioneered the whole missional thing.
Yeah.
And so, like, thinking of, say, that short-term missionaries experiences or prayer walking and things, I feel like if you take his framework, that the very same activity, like of a prayer walk or going to meet another place with a different missional framing, like if you decolonize the notion of mission, then it can actually be a deep experience, right? So the few things I remember finding really helpful when in reading him, back a long time ago, is he begins thinking about mission where there's a pre-existing divine presence anywhere in all
Mm,
creation, right?
mm.
So in before any missionary arrives, you already know that God knows the name, faces, and cares about each and every divine image bearer,
Yep.
and so you don't bring God to new places.
Right.
And so that sets up this different way of understanding how the gospel arrives in cultures, because no culture bears the gospel, it's expressed in cultures differently. And so that, like, you could use those as a way of teaching kind of a critical contextualization, where you're going like, how does the gospel both affirm cultural elements that reflect God's truth, and how does it challenge things that are present in any context? And so then the missionary
Yes.
is primarily a
Yes.
learner. It's like so those prayer walks are kind of like, let us go God spotting. Let
Yeah.
me, as someone that's learned this culture, name all these beautiful things that I couldn't have known
Yes.
except I got to know my neighbors and got
Yes.
to know this place. And then let me tell you on the way we're going to serve and stuff together, how, because I love all these things about this culture and because I've gotten to
Yes.
know it, I think we could embody the gospel publicly by doing X, Y, and Z, right? And some of them
Mm.
will be the basic things that are there, right? Caring for people's health care, or
Yeah.
education and
So
literacy,
good.
empowering women in a
So
culture
good.
that doesn't recognize it. And the thing I loved about Leslie Newbigin's thing is he goes, like, when we're doing this, we're not like wussing out on being a missionary. We're actually resisting the church's colonializing of God's eschatological vision, right? Like when you read scripture, right? Like the picture, God becoming all in all, or all the nations coming, like it didn't like they all switch teams. They don't like become different nations.
Right.
There's like something of the divine expressed in all the different cultures, peoples, tribes, and
So good.
nations.
Yep.
And by getting to know them, by learning of them,
Yep.
we as the short-term missionaries get to go home to bear witness to what the body of Christ looks like in
Preach.
places that you'll never know, right? And
Preach.
so the think of the same prayer walk, like going to
Yep.
those springs,
Yep.
right? And you go like, let me tell you about how these have functioned before any Christian showed up. It did
Yep.
this, and the founder of our denomination went here, and you go, oh, what is that thread? Well, these springs are a part of God's creation, and all creation is being redeemed and renewed. And when we showed up, we did not even know this was a viable gift from God, and yet they've been cherishing this gift, and you get to experience it today.
Yeah.
And so when it gets to share time tonight, I've actually already like saved us a big hot spring. So after you've served and we've
Yeah.
done the feeding or worked with kids or what, all that kind of stuff, we're going to unpack how we've seen God today in a place we've never been,
Yep.
in a hot spring that for thousands of years people have come resonating with the Spirit at the end of the day of hard work in their
Yep.
community and shared their stories. And we're going to share them today. And then you get there at the end of the day, you go in the spring and you're like, how did you? What is a part of God that you've never seen before that you encountered today? And
Yes.
people will tell stories. Any human
Oh.
will. And then you get to go. And here's what too many Christians don't know how to do:
Yeah.
name it and be grateful.
Yes.
So let us pray. God, thank you for showing us parts of you we could have never seen unless we were here.
Amen.
And thank you for a spring that we get to sit in, that people set in encountering you before they ever heard the word Jesus.
Yes.
And whether they can use that name or not,
Yep.
let us celebrate that your Spirit is not cloistered up with us carrying our Bible and our agenda here, but has always been here. And help us remember that the body of Christ that we're a part of, when we share the Eucharist, we're sharing it with people here that blah blah. You could just go
Yep.
through that whole
Yep.
thing, and it transforms those very same practices. And I think that there are openings to it, and that's one of the I think that's one of the gifts evangelicalism that encounters the modern world and has these progressive values that something like that expresses, can actually like give those of us that
Yes.
are in mainline traditions
Yes.
who aren't even sure God's present and active in our own world, and that the
Wow.
responsibility for the divine's been outsourced just to us and our political investment or whatever,
Yeah.
to go
God
like,
help us.
let us name it, let's
Yes.
be grateful for it. And you're actually teaching in that short-term experience a way to think about the gospel in your own culture, right?
Yes.
Like, what are the things here we're going to celebrate?
Mm.
That at the Moral Monday movement, this atheist is sitting there and was okay with demon talk because he understood that America has demons around race, even if there aren't real demons.
Yeah.
Or what, anyway, to me, there's it, like so often we just chuck everything out. And that Leslie Newbegin's kind of like thinking about mission and what
Yep.
it's like to do it seriously.
Yep.
I found so helpful at that point, like when I
Yes.
first read it. But that's about all I remember of it, though.
Perhaps the best book on the subject I've ever read is called Eternity in Their Hearts by Don Richardson. He takes out of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11, that God has placed eternity in the hearts of humankind. And so our job, right, and this is a very Quaker idea, our job is to find that light that God has placed eternity in the hearts of mankind. So on a side note, Eric Lindquist in the comment section says, religious tourism, where Tebow's family made its money. And it's cringy because it's a profit center more than anything else. So possibly cynical, possibly true, maybe a little of each.
Are we going to take the knee, the Tebow knee?
But Tripp, I want to tell you a great story. In 2010, I wrote my master thesis on contextual theology at George Fox Evangelical Seminary. Randy Woodley was my primary reader, and my secondary reader was Richard Twiss, both Native American contextual theologians. In my section on of my master thesis, one of the things I talked about was the springs of Saratoga and how they became a framing metaphor for our entire ministry there at the church I was at, and how we actually experienced revival and renewal and physical healing by talking about the springs and using that as our framing metaphor. I also talked about my trip to Ukraine in 2008 when I discovered that the trees in the city that we were in during the Soviet days, they would bring very sick people with respiratory problems to this city, and that scientists had recently seen that it's the way that the pollens of the different trees interact with each other that there's something about it that is healing. And I talked about in Revelation, there's a verse that talks about that the trees are for the healing of the nations, right? So I thought I had done a great job on this master thesis. And Richard Twiss, during my exam, my defense of my thesis, Richard Twiss says to me, so you talked a lot about the springs. Did you ever take sick people to the springs and have them drink the mineral water or soak in it? And I froze and I thought, oh shit. And I said, no, it was just sort of a metaphor. It was a word picture for us. And you could tell he was like, how much of a dumbass do you have to be that you have this natural resource and you use it as a word picture and a metaphor inside a metal building, right? We had built our own church building. You're inside a metal building with a cement floor. You've blocked out all of the light so that the PowerPoint can be easily seen. There's nothing natural in the building at all, but your entire ministry is based around these springs, and you never took sick people to soak in the springs or drink the water. And Tripp, my only defense was, I mean, during the week, I would go to the springs to do my devotions, and I would drink from all 10 springs. But no, as a ministry model, we didn't, I mean, it was just an idea. And you could tell he was completely dismayed, like, how dumb are white people?
Yeah. Yeah, which if people want to hear him ask that question, they can go listen to the podcast we did at Wild Goose West, 12 years ago. With Randy and with Richard and Andy. It was,
oh Lord. Talk about cringy, man. I have so many stories. We're going to come full circle here, from the pizza at Big Tent Phoenix to defending my master thesis with Richard Twiss. I've made so many dumb, mistakes but think by the grace of God that I've learned from. But man, sometimes to tell the stories, you just shake your head and think, whoa, what was I doing? Well, thanks for helping me think this through, Tripp. I mean, I'm serious. I haven't preached through Daniel in more than 20 years. I knew what I wanted to do with the first 9. And now it's week 10, and I'm staring at this text thinking, what direction do I want to take this? And so I have really been looking forward to my Friday crowdsourcing sermon prep with you and this crew in our comment section. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, it's always fun. It's always fun. I wrote something down 40 minutes ago.
Oh,
I forgot because when you mentioned record,
yeah,
he has this line where he said, this is in light of that 4th point on your, really the phrase he uses is the surplus of meaning.
That's right.
But he said, we need to learn to read scripture not as not propositionally but dispositionally, by in the naming of God, a new relationship with God, self, world, others generated. So texts are not deposits of truth, but a call to faithfully enact a productive clash or fusion between our world and the world envisioned in faith, and which makes revelation not a propositional thing but a performative one.
I like that. So not dispensationalism, but dispositional.
Yeah. Well, right, and that really resonates with the last time we talked about Daniel, about both their fasting, all the how do you attend to what goes in you and you attend to what goes out of you.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
The kind of like the dispositions of reception and engagement.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Lori says that John Collins has some good lectures online on Daniel. Thanks, Lori. I'm going to check those out.
Yeah, John Collins, smart guy. I think the big book he did on it, I think, is called Apocalyptic Imagination, where,
okay,
which is includes all the apocalyptic texts that are canonized, but then like the broader ones at the time, and looking at what's going on.
That's good. I mean, I've read a lot on that subject, but not encountered John Collins yet. So that's a really good pointer. Tripp, I gotta be honest. If I were to draft a team to do group sourced sermon prep, I think Lori and Renee Goodwin and you would be my first 3 draft picks.
Oh, well,
if we were going to crowdsource sermon prep, you guys know so much. It's incredible.
It's fun. One of the things I was thinking about is just the idea of the decision that I'm going to go preach through Daniel.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I would start it, but not tell everyone, because I might get to a point where I go, I don't know if I want to keep doing this.
Listen, I can't believe you brought this up. I almost said, but then I decided not to, but I almost said, Tripp, there have only been a couple times in my life of ministry where I have gotten into a series, and about 3/4 of the way through, I thought about quitting and switching to topical sermons. One time I remember the book of Acts, I got to about Acts 21, and I thought, man, this book is starting to drag. It's all the same thing. Once you get to 20 through 28, it's all the same thing. And I was like, I can't believe I have to do 8 more weeks of this, right?
Oh, come on. The best chapter is 29.
No, that's such a nerdy joke. That is the nerdiest joke inside baseball you have delivered yet. Acts 29. Shame on you. But this Daniel series, I've been sort of dreading 8, 9, and 10, but I got to tell you, it's been better than I could have imagined. It's more interesting to read it through a progressive lens, like even a messianic component, historically fulfilled, than it is to write to jail, Josh Patterson says, than it was to read it through an apocalyptic lens as a charismatic. I'm actually enjoying reading it through this historic messianic progressive lens than I did as an eschatological event. I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome.
Right to jail.
Well, thank you everyone for hanging out with us. I like getting to do this. Definitely enjoy our regular live streaming commenters. It's a lot of fun. And would love for y'all to come hang out with us at Theology Beer Camp, theologybeer.camp. We're gonna have some fun. But yeah, no, this is good. You should send me a link to where you post your sermons and things so I can put it in the episode post thing, since people have been hearing your
sure
prep.
I will. Hey Renee, there is no videos of the acts. That was before YouTube. That was like 21 years ago, so no videos, unfortunately. But I will send a link to these Daniel ones.
Awesome. All
Thanks,
righty.
everyone.